This is day 3 of a 6-part series on eating 6 unique meals for only $2.50 a day. The rules are simple. For this week, I can only consume food that I bought at the beginning of the week for $15. Though I am allowing myself reasonable amounts of spices. I'm releasing a video every day for these 6 days, so stay tuned and enjoy. Alright, day 3. This is a rough one, guys, so let's just jump into it. If you watched the previous video, you know that last night I threw together a simple dough of water, flour, and a bit of salt. This is the dough ball today, nice and firm, and hopefully ready for what we are going to do. What is that, you may ask? Well, last year, these hand-stretched and ripped noodles showed up all over YouTube. So I decided that now, in the middle of a stressful challenge, on camera, was the perfect time to figure this out. As for a topping for these, I decided to use that tofu we got on sale. Now, tofu is packed in water, so we will need to dry it in order to fry it up on the stove. For this, I took a couple of sheets of paper towel and wrapped the soggy brick of soy protein. To weigh this down, I just laid on a plate and stacked a couple of glass jars on top. This will hopefully press a good amount of the moisture out of the block. After 15 minutes, half of the paper towel was soaked, so I flipped the brick to the dry side and reapplied the weights. And I just let that go for another 15 minutes. After this was done, I took the now somewhat less soggy brick and, patting it down one more time for good measure, sliced the brick in half widthwise and then into roughly 1-inch cubes, depositing them into a bowl. Now, as mentioned before, I am planning on frying these, so in order to encourage crispiness, I took a tablespoon of flour and spread it over top, and just tossed it to coat evenly. Now, normally people use cornstarch to do this, but, flour has starch in it, right? This is going to work great. Anyway, I just set my trusty cast iron skillet on the oven over medium-high, and added 40 grams of the clarified butter/ghee that we made yesterday to the pan. Once that was shimmering, I gently set the tofu cubes in the pan and let those fry for a few minutes. In the meantime, I took the can of mixed vegetables and drained all of the liquid out of the can. Back at the stove, I added a sprinkling of salt and pepper to the tofu and mixed them around a bit. I tried to make sure I was getting every side of the cubes nice and golden brown. Once I felt like they were crispy enough, I dumped the can of mixed vegetables in and... wow, that's a lot of potatoes. Oh well, it's probably fine. So anyway, I just stirred it around and let it go for a few minutes to try to drive off some of that moisture. And yeah, those tofu cubes are pretty soggy. Not to be perturbed, I decided to spice it up with a bit of smoked paprika, garlic powder, a few glugs of soy sauce, and a bit of cayenne pepper. I just mixed that up and lowered the heat to low while I got the noodles ready. Taking the now room temperature dough, I just rolled it out a bit and divided it into 6 roughly even pieces. Taking one of these, I rolled it out into a long rectangle. For reference, this is how the stretching is supposed to go. And here is how I did. I went ahead and, although they were pretty ugly, I set the noodles aside. Now, experienced noodle makers will recognize the classic mistake I am making here. As my pile of noodles is growing, without tossing in more flour, that pile is slowly fusing together into a tangled mass of dough and crushed dreams. I tried to salvage it off camera, but as we come back to the stove where I have a pot of boiling water, the pieces are less than consistent and about twice as thick as tradition would dictate. Regardless, after a few minutes of cooking, the noodles began slowly floating to the top, indicating that they were done. I went ahead and strained the pasta water and went over to the countertop to plate up. So here we go. First, a bed of our amazing, not at all disgusting masses of boiled dough, and over it our tofu stir-fry with mixed vegetables. Truly, this is the essence of good YouTube content. Tasting it, to be perfectly honest, if it wasn't for the intensely unpleasant texture, it really wasn't that bad. And again, I hadn't eaten anything since the previous evening, so the hunger pushed me to almost finish this, only stopping short of a few noodles. As before, here is the nutrition information. And I mean, it's not bad at all. Easily the most protein so far, and a decent amount of calories. I might have to revisit this concept in an actual recipe sometime down the road. But this was not the only thing I did on day 3. I also took a stab at baking a loaf of bread, an enriched white sandwich loaf to be specific. This started with 300 milliliters of tap water, to which I added 1 of the packets of yeast and 400 grams of flour. I also added 60 grams, about 4 tablespoons of the butter, softened in the microwave. This butter will provide the enrichment for the dough, hopefully making a more tender and flavorful loaf. I just mixed this with my wooden spoon until it got too sticky, then got in there with my hands and mixed it for just a few minutes. Once untenably sticky, I let the dough rest for about 30 minutes before trying again. It was still incredibly sticky, but by alternatively stretching it up and punching it down, I kneaded it for another 5 minutes, and then covered it again, this time for about an hour and a half, until doubled in size. Before I get this in the oven, I went ahead and greased the inside of my loaf dish with a little bit of softened butter. Once done, I dusted my countertop with a bit of flour and turned out the risen, still very sticky dough. Now, from watching my mother make similar loaves, I knew that rolling the dough was best, so I formed the dough into a long rectangle, with the short side about the length of the loaf dish. Starting from the end, I rolled the dough up into a tube, and just plopped it into the dish. Now, experienced bread makers may already see a problem, but I was blissfully unaware at this time, and just covered the loaf with a towel, letting it rise one more time for another hour or so. This accomplished, I tossed the loaf into a preheated 350-degree oven for a little more than 30 minutes, until the internal temperature reached 195 degrees, turning on the broiler right at the end for some extra color. I removed the loaf from the dish to a cooling rack. As you can see, the sides and bottom did not get browned at all. This is due to me using a glass loaf dish. In the future, I will definitely be using a metal loaf pan. I'm not going to eat this today, so we'll have to wait until tomorrow to see how I did. Regardless, it was 11:30 p.m. at this point, the meal had not gone spectacularly, and I had a million dishes to clean. All I could hope is that the next day would be a bit better. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you then.